Welcome to Slight Reliability, learning SRE one day at a time. I'm Stephen Townsend. Welcome back to the second episode of Slight Reliability in 1 week, because I wanted to get a few more pre-reaction videos out for o11yfest. So today I'll be going through another 3 talks, which will be part of the upcoming o11yfest conference, and sharing my thoughts and the ideas and things that came to me as I listened to them and digested what was being said. The 4th talk which I listened to and watched was Observability Driven Development by Jessica Kerr. And even before I started listening to the talk, I absolutely loved the idea of developers using observability tooling. Too often, in my experience, observability is a thing which is hoarded by a small number of senior operations engineers or tech leads, and developers either are not included or not interested in some cases. And there's so much missed opportunity there. So what an awesome idea. Jessica showed the use of a tracing tool to see each function call which was happening as the code is executed, how long it's taking to get a really clear picture. And she instrumented code using OpenTelemetry in her talk, which is really awesome to see. I had a question there in my mind, which is, do developers think about how long their code takes to execute? Is that a general thing which all developers do, or is it something that particular experienced developers do? I actually don't know the answer to that question. I never worked as a developer. The OpenTelemetry code examples in the real world, fantastic. Well, they were examples rather than the real world, but it's good to see it in action. I liked the idea that she raised around utilizing the same observability tooling in production as was used during development. Of course, why not do that? If everyone is used to using the same tooling, then if an issue occurs in production, then all developers are going to be able to find the issue a lot faster because they're used to using these tools to debug and identify issues. So yeah, really love that idea of using the same consistent process and tooling for production and development. I also liked her focus on showing business or customer impact because of a change being made to some code. That's brilliant. I'm always a massive proponent for that. And overall, she was a very engaging speaker, a really concise presentation as well. Actually, going to say one of the best conference talks I've seen in quite a while. So if you're going to watch o11yfest, which I highly recommend you do, I definitely recommend checking out Observability Driven Development by Jessica Kerr. The 5th session which I checked out was called Return on Investment Driven Observability by Michael Hausenblas. And he opened by talking about a common pattern in organizations where we have monolithic applications which contain a lot of services. We have a strategy to decouple those services to help in many different ways, and we break those into microservices. But by breaking them down into microservices, we now have a distributed system, and all those components need to communicate with each other, and there's a lot more complexity, which makes it much more challenging to observe, to have observability about what's going on. But within this new level of complexity, observability is now incredibly compulsory to get it right. So having this observability strategy is something which we need to do once we have these complex distributed microservices solutions. So talking about the return on investment, he was talking about what are the investments that we make? Is it our sources of data and the agents we install and the licensing fees or whatever, the different destinations that we send our data, and all other costs associated with people and infrastructure and software fees. Also the runtime overhead of running our observability tooling. And also the cost of storage for logs and for metrics. And then, well, what's the return on the investment we get? Is it faster iterations, delivery? Is it less resource usage? Particularly helpful in the context of cloud, where that can literally mean savings of thousands and thousands of dollars. Or maybe a return is faster recovery after incidents. And of course, ultimately, we're all looking for happier customers. He also, another point I liked was around buy versus build in terms of your observability. But if you build using open source standards, you are ultimately more flexible about what you can do and how you change and adjust in the future. The last thing that really stood out for me was he mentioned some different signal types. And I've heard, often we hear about logs, metrics, and traces. We always hear about those. He also mentioned profiles, which I hadn't really heard about. I mean, I've kind of heard of the term profiling before, but he mentioned this thing called profiles, and he defined it as resource usage in the context of code execution. And that's a new idea for me in the world of observability. And he mentioned it's an emerging open source landscape around where we store that data. So that was really interesting. Again, it was a very well professionally put together talk, and I highly recommend it. The sixth and potentially final pre-reaction I'll do was for a talk called How the OpenTelemetry Collector Puts You in the Driver's Seat by Alex Boten. Now, I was trying to avoid talks about OpenTelemetry, but there were just so many of them that I decided to just dive into one. It sounds like it is the topic of this moment and something which I will inevitably be involved in the near future. So, microservices, again, can lead to a messy observability situation, particularly any distributed system. You can end up with many different tools, and then what happens if you want to consolidate or to change tooling? Do you have to redo your instrumentation? How do you do it, right? Now, the OpenTelemetry Collector is a way that we can consolidate all of this complex observability without having to re-instrument code or install new exporters and agents, which is quite powerful. I didn't actually realize really how powerful this could be until I saw this talk. So the OpenTelemetry Collector, it is a vendor agnostic way to receive, process, and export data, and it supports a pretty impressive set of formats, both in terms of input and output. So you can have this one collector sitting there, and it can pull in data from 10, a dozen, 20 different sources, all into the same place, and then export them to whatever destination that you want to send them. And that's a pretty cool idea. And during the talk, he mentioned that you can also transform the data that you're receiving. So first of all, you receive, then you can process that data and transform it in the way that you want before you export it on to whatever destination you send it to. He showed us the YAML configuration for configuring the collector, and it looked pretty straightforward and simple. You define your receivers and your processors and your exporters, any extensions you want, and then a section for services, which is where you pull all the config together. The OpenTelemetry Collector, it seems to be able to take data from just about anywhere. The key thing is you don't need to re-instrument all your code when you switch to use OpenTelemetry. You don't need to install new agents. If you have Prometheus agents running, you can keep using them and just get the collector to receive that information in its current format. That opens up a really interesting possibility around experimentation. So you can pull in, say, data from Prometheus or wherever. You can then export that data to multiple places. So you could, in theory, export the same data to 2 or 3 or 4 different tools and then compare them. Which tool is better at visualizing and the data, or is easy to use? It could be a really great way to do that, a nice clear comparison between the different tools that you may be considering. So that was pretty cool. And it's pretty interesting hearing about the collector for myself. One of the current challenges that I'm facing is having, a sprawl of different tools around the organization. And in order to answer the questions that I have about reliability, I need to go to many different tools. So I need to go to Splunk, I need to go to Prometheus, I need to go to ServiceNow to find out about incidents. I also need to go to New Relic in some cases. And it sounds like the OpenTelemetry Collector could be something I could use in this particular situation to pull all the reliability metrics and logs and traces that I need into the one place. So that's pretty cool. He also showed how you can write your own exporters and receivers. It's very extensible. So you're kind of future-proofing yourself by the sound of it, because it doesn't matter what your requirements will be in the future. If someone else hasn't written the code to support that, then you can write it yourself. So that sounds pretty cool. Overall, I have to say, despite myself, I am being convinced by the idea of OpenTelemetry and the possibilities here. And I can't help but think about how I can apply it to my own work. And I've already been talking about it with my team at work today about the possibilities around OpenTelemetry and what we might be able to do. So yeah, another really good talk. I love the examples, showing the code. If you're interested in OpenTelemetry, there are a lot of really good talks in o11yfest about it, but this is a really good one among them. So that is the end of another episode of Slight Reliability. I may not be able to put out an episode next week, as I have quite a busy weekend with kids' birthday parties and other events. So if I don't see you next week, I'll see you in a week and a half. Please, if you can, go along to o11yfest and hear all about observability from May 9th to the 12th. It's free, or I encourage you to donate. It goes to a good cause. And also SLOconf. Unfortunately, it's running at exactly the same time. I'm also speaking with my colleague Gwen De Leon at that conference as well, around our journey defining service level objectives in the murky real world. All right, that's all, and I'll see you next time.